Alright, I don't know how the video quality is going to be on this thing, but at least we can go ahead and get started. I got to make sure that you guys can see all the cool stuff I have in my office, because everybody knows that for your American Lit teacher, he's got to be a cool, suave guy who knows a lot of stuff about pop culture and Dungeons and Dragons and just garbage, because your American Lit teacher has to be a very strange person in order for you to actually want to listen to him about stuff. So I just thought that this is a really good way for us to actually deliver content in this class, to actually talk about things without you having to read everything out of a textbook. I prefer for you not to read stuff out of textbooks. I want you to actually feel like you're in a classroom with me and I'm, giving you the traditional lecture treatment. This is going to be the first YouTube lecture. I'm going to try to post these at least once a week. I still haven't got the syllabus encoded yet. I hope to have that tomorrow. I'm also going to post your reading list, which is going to basically have everything we're going to read in the course. So you can go ahead and start reading ahead if you want. I don't care. As you can tell, I've started to create discussion forums. I'm going to create several forums for different purposes. I want you to participate in those forums, again, at least once a week. Typically, you can respond to my lectures even. And as long as you're participating in those forums once a week and addressing the occasional assignment I put out, we're going to be fine. You're going to write a couple of papers in here. There will be a few tests. The tests, as long as you watch my lectures, should not be that difficult, because I'm going to try to be really interesting and energetic, and you're just going to be like, man, this David guy is better than a Michael Bay Transformers sequel, which is pretty awful because I hate those movies. I love the first one, but Transformers Dark of the Moon, I think I would rather be punched in the face continuously than what. Now Michael Bay's going to get angry at me because I'm going to post this on YouTube and he's going to get us feelings all hurt. Anyway, let's talk about literature. What I want to do today is I'm going to slowly acclimate you guys to American Lit as a concept. Of course, this is a literature course. Its primary focus is obviously American Lit. I'm more of a world lit kind of guy. I like especially British literature. That's where more of my specialty is. But American Lit's pretty interesting too, because American literature is really much more, I'm going to have to take some notes so I know what to test you guys on later. It's much more modern. You don't really have a lot of epic poetry in American Lit, which some of you guys are like, thank God. Bullet narrowly dodged there. As much as I'm a fan of epic poetry, we're going to be reading stuff that's a lot more realistic. We're going to read a little bit of poetry. We're going to read a little bit of drama, which I'm actually going to see if I can find a YouTube video for you to watch of Eugene O'Neill's Long Day's Journey into Night. We're going to read, it's funny. Our novel should be The Tommyknockers by Stephen King. I can't wait to do my YouTube lecture on Stephen King. I don't know if you guys can see this or not. I'm going to unplug it so I can take you on a tour. That's my Stephen King collection right there, right now. I got a pretty good bit. Big fan of Stephen King, believe it or not. He's a lot more literary than you might think, even though his movies are terrible for the most part. But the books are actually really good. I really like Tommyknockers quite a bit. So I'm excited about doing this class in the online format. I think it's going to be really cool. What we're going to start with, actually, is a webcomic by Veronica Vera. I know Veronica. She's responded to student questions before, which is really, really nifty. I don't have Veronica's stuff with me right now. I have her books at home. I might do more of a lecture on Vera next week. But I think that's going to be your first reading assignment. It's a webcomic that's more of kind of like an angsty high school teenage romance drama. Believe it or not, it's actually handled really well, even though it stars dogs and cats. But I know it sounds really strange, but it's a great place to first start talking about literature. I want to make a few quick points just to get this class started off in the right direction. One of the main questions I ask at the beginning of the course is this: why literature? Why are you in this class? Why does it matter that we're going to be watching YouTube lectures of me barking about stories that are, in some cases, hundreds of years old, 200 years at the most, I think. Old poetry, old colonial stuff. We're going to read Sleepy Hollow at one point about the Headless Horseman. This is a college education. In a lot of cases, you guys are doing really technical stuff like criminal justice, maybe medical. Why do you guys need to know who the Headless Horseman was? Well, I can answer that in a lot of different ways. This course is a lot like a history course. It teaches us what American culture is. It teaches us where we came from. It teaches us why we are here. Literature back in the day was really more about entertainment rather than anything else. You guys go to a movie theater to see Transformers Dark of the Moon. They didn't have stuff like that back then, you know? I mean, especially, you know, when you think about, you know, the 1800s, a lot of people, you know, you get a book, you want that book to be really thick, to have a lot of content in it that you can actually interact with, that's complex, that makes you think. This is what people did with their time. So in a lot of ways, when we talk about literature, especially older literature, we're looking at the entertainment of the day. Why were people interested in this? What was about it that made it so popular? That's one of the main things I'm going to be talking about. I look at literature from a very, very historical perspective. That's called the new historical perspective. It's a little bit it's a little bit bland compared to how most people interpret literature. There are some people who look at literature from a psychological perspective. How do we get an understanding of the human mind? Some people look at it from a social perspective. How do we understand how society works? Some of it look at it from a gender perspective. What does it mean to be a man in culture? What does it mean to be a woman in culture? These are all ways that we can approach it. We're going to talk about those theories, but the main thing I want to iterate right now is keep in mind that we're consuming content that was meant primarily for entertainment. It was written to sell. So when we first get into the Puritans, when we get into old stuff that's really hard for you, and it will be hard. Don't be nervous if you read a lot of stuff and you go back and you're like, oh my God, I didn't understand any of that. That's okay. That's the way most people feel when they come to these books for the very first time. That's part of the reason that I'm introducing you to Veronica Vera first, because I want to see how much time I got. Veronica demonstrates, in my opinion, what is the most important, and it's my favorite literary theory. And I think I'm going to take a few minutes to explain that theory to you real quick, because it is a very good introduction to the comic Bittersweet Candy Bowl, which is your first reading assignment. I'll post more about that. But as we approach literature, sometimes we adopt these theories and we look for the terms, and we look for hints that that theory is in play. It's kind of like you're trying to say that a story or a poem has certain goals or is showing certain things about human existence. Unfortunately, it's going to be kind of weird in the YouTube environment, because normally I can work with this with a lot of dialogue and discussion, but I kind of just have to rattle it off for you right now. So I'm going to try to do that for you real quick. It's going to be a long video, but that's okay. Vera demonstrates existentialism. Existentialism is definitely one of the more complicated literary theories. And I'm going to try to explain it to you now. Existentialism was brought about, really it was made famous by Jean-Paul Sartre. And I wish I had a picture of Sartre to show you, because he was not a handsome man. But that's neither here nor there. Anyway, Sartre wrote a book called Being and Nothingness. I know. Quite the title, right? But Sartre believed that humans have a very, very particular problem that keeps coming up in their art, keeps coming up in their poetry, keeps coming up in writing. It comes up over and over and over again. And it's an interesting problem, because it's one of the ones that people do tend to identify with very, very well. So Sartre was on to something with his work in it's kind of a psychoanalytic theory. It deals with how the mind works. And I'm going to try to explain it to you very, very simply. Most humans have a very, very big fear in their lives. And that fear is of the nothingness of existence. That existence is without meaning. There is no meaning anywhere. It's a very atheistic theory, but you don't necessarily have to be an atheist to subscribe to it. There were a few Christian existentialists, but I want to try to stick to Sartre. He believed that absolutely nothing anywhere had any value whatsoever, because, well, one day you're going to die, and after you die, everything is rendered moot at that point. There's really just absolutely no value to anything. So what humanity did in response to this, or what humanity does in response to this, is we create meaning for ourselves. We create value everywhere we go. And most of the time, we don't want to acknowledge that we're actually doing that. We want to pretend that things do have meaning, things do have value, and we get away from the fact that Our entire existence is predicated on our ability to make ourselves believe in value. Now, let me make this simpler, because that was a lot of philosophical gobbledygook, and that's a lot to put into a YouTube video for the very first lecture of class. Existentialism basically states that what we're really afraid of, the thing that disturbs us the most, is our responsibility. We are all creating ourselves. We all choose what we value. We all choose what is most important to us. And again, we don't want to admit that. And so one of the most human things that we do, one of the most human elements in our behavior, is our ability to lie to ourselves. We are constantly lying to ourselves. It's one of the things that makes us fundamentally human. And I know you guys are like, man, Mr. Bailey, you're going really fast on this. Why don't you just talk about the course for a minute? Well, just hold on. This is fun stuff. One of the main ways that Sartre illustrates this is with his story of the woman who, when she... Crud, that's really bad. I shouldn't tell this story. It's not that it's a bad story, it's just a really boring one. Let me put it this way. Because I want this to be a very, very good inlet into Bittersweet Candy Bowl. When you lie to yourself, when you deceive yourself, you have what is called bad faith. Write that down. It's important. Bad faith. It's going to come back later. And that's a very simple term. Bad faith is just that you know something is true or not true, and you're trying to convince yourself otherwise. Maybe it's something that you're responsible for and you want to make excuses for yourself. Maybe it's the fact that you really, really care about someone, but you don't want to look like you care about the person. You ever been there? Yeah, we've all been there. So that's bad faith, lying to yourself. Now, the next term that's important, and write this one down too, is my favorite, and that's dread. Dread. D-R-E-A-D. Dread is what happens when you are running out of your ability to lie to yourself. When you know something is true, when you suffer, when you are despairing, you are without hope because you have run right into that thing that you can't deny any longer, and you don't want to let it go. That's dread. The final step in this process is authenticity. That's when you punch straight through the lying. That's when you overcome the bad faith, the dread, to accept the truth. That typically is a very painful thing. Authenticity is a very, very painful process because you come to the truth, and oftentimes your entire world is destroyed in that process. Now, for Bittersweet Candy Bowl, one of the things I want you guys to do is I want you to read that story, and I'll give you selections below this video. Okay, it's right down there. You're going to have a cast of characters. Some of them are lying to themselves. Some of them are very much steeped in bad faith. Some of them are in the midst of despair. Some of them are encountering the thing that they are running away from. Only a few, a very select few, have bridged to authenticity. This is the fun of this story. And existentialism is a concept that people typically struggle with for years to understand because it is a very complex psychological thing. But using those three terms, dread, bad faith, authenticity, you'll be able to do some existential analysis of Bittersweet Candy Bowl very quickly to give you kind of acclimated to the language of American lit, the language of lit in general. Now, I know I'm throwing you to the wolves on this, but I'm going to try to have a presence in the discussion forums as you guys, debate this and try to establish who is feeling what. You might find that some people in the class disagree on who is being authentic, and that's the fun part. So, without further ado, links are below. That's Bittersweet Candy Bowl. Go ahead and read those chapters, and let's get to discussing. If you guys have any trouble, I'll be here in Cyberland.